I see we are already being joined by many of the participants. I'll just wait a few more seconds as we are at the hour now. Thanks for joining on time. All right. I'm sure there will be many more people joining in the next couple of minutes. I will get started. Welcome very much to this Patient Engagement Open Forum Coffee and Learn session, unlocking the strategic value of patient engagement in healthcare investments, a new tool for the patient engagement community. This is what we will discuss today. But first, just a quick reminder on how these sessions are running. We move to the next slide. You know that this is a collaborative space, a safe space, and we want you to be present and engaged. We also ask you to please keep your microphones in mute when you're not speaking. And throughout this session today, you will or you may have a lot of questions that come up. So please note them down or directly send them into the chat, and the team will make sure that we aggregate them. And later on, we'll have a short Q&A session with the speakers. Also, this is a recorded session for everyone to know, and it will be published later on. And of course, we come together here to learn. And so let's make this a great learning experience altogether. For those who wish to follow this session in a different language other than English, you have the opportunity to use Wordly. Wordly will allow it that you choose a language, and you should have the pop-up now on your screen, a language of your choosing to follow with live translations. All right, so we're in the early minutes of this session before we dive into the introduction of the pivot tool. And with that, also hear from several voices of co-creators and key partners that have been helping in the creation of this new tool. In the last 15, 20 minutes of this call, we will have a open discussion and a Q&A, so be prepared for that as well. And of course, we'll round up the session with short closing remarks. That being said, before we get into the introduction of the tool, this topic, patient engagement and investment, is still new, it's still nascent, and we would really love to hear from you how you think about the connection between patient engagement and investment, and what you expect from it in the future. So if you could help us create a little word cloud with some ideas and thoughts that you have. The question is, in one word, how do you feel about the collaboration between the patient community, industry, and the investment community to advance patient engagement? Giving everyone a second to log into the Slido. And I see people are getting in a pioneering topic, transformative. Slow is winning over. Of course, change happens step by step, and it can be frustrating. There's some skepticism, so I'll be curious to hear about that in the later in the session as well. Still very early. There's some nervosity as well, and it is certainly not an easy connection to make. And we'll be exploring a little bit of the challenges of connecting between patient and investment communities as well. There's some compliance considerations as well. That's an interesting one. Like that. Thank you very much. So the poll is going to stay open a little bit longer, but thank you a lot for the initial insights that you've provided. And with that and these early insights, I'd like to introduce our speakers of the day. My name is Vincent Raske. I'm working as an Associate Program Director at PFMD, and I will be moderating today's session and explaining a little bit about the new pivot tool. But I'm joined by Faye Weston, who's a patient expert with extensive experience in patient engagement, and interestingly, also in investor relations within the pharmaceutical industry. So a really diverse perspective she brings. Nikul Bakshi from Parkinson's UK, Research Involvement Manager at the organization, is joining us, and Pommelin Costagne from Gilde Healthcare Partners, associate in the investment company there. So I'd like to open the floor for Faye, Nicole, and Pommelin in that order to quickly give a little bit of a background on themselves.
Hi, I'm Faye Weston. My interest is the fact that I've been a patient for as long as I can remember. I have an autoimmune disease. But I've worked extensively in pharma and biotech in both medical, commercial, and mainly investor relations. So this is of huge interest to me.
Thank you, Faye.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicole. I head up our patient and public involvement program at Parkinson's UK, and I've been working here for about 4 or 5 years now. This is a really interesting session for us because we hold a distinct position as a patient organization, as we have another arm, which is a patient-led venture impact fund, where we invest in small biotech companies, starting from the range of around 1.5 million to 3 million pounds. So we've got got both perspectives here, and from a patient organization as well as an investor. So very much looking forward to the conversation this afternoon.
Hi everyone, I'm Pommelin Costagne. I work at Gilde Healthcare, as said by Vincent. Gilde is a healthcare specific investment fund. And so we invest in companies that are developing new therapeutics and health tech solutions. And with that, patient engagement is an important part of our activities, both when looking into new solutions as well as working with our portfolio companies. So very much looking forward to this session.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the introductions. And I want to highlight that both Faye and Nico have been key contributors to this new tool, including the project group behind the Investment Sustainability and Impact Project of PFMD. Pommelin and her colleagues have contributed as strategic partners to this tool as well. So let's get started. I'll explain a little bit about the background. The Pivot tool, Patient Involvement for Value Optimization and Targeted Investment, is a strategic and action-oriented tool to help communicate the value patient engagement can bring to investors. With that, it also hopes to catalyze a culture shift towards more patient-informed and centric practices, both in the investment community, but also across the pharmaceutical and biotech industry. We've set out to co-create that tool within PFMD to support capacity building among the patient engagement community. As we have seen in the first part with the work cloud, it's a nascent topic. It is still not everyone is familiar with the intersection and how patient engagement actually relates to the investment world. And so we really hope that with this tool that can bring capacity, it also helps to build stronger partnerships between the patient community, the industry stakeholders, and investors to promote long-term patient-focused healthcare investments. Really, it provides tools and evidence to position patient engagement as a value driver within healthcare investment. And it helps you to demonstrate the value of patient engagement and drive its integration within investment strategies and operations. And so, Faye and Nico, you've been part of co-creating this tool. So I'll ask you a couple of questions first. Faye, why is this tool so relevant for the patient engagement community?
Well, I think the fact is that communication is absolutely everything in this particular situation. And what we're hoping is that the Pivot tool will really help with this. But what we need to recognise in the background is that the motivations of three groups, healthcare, pharma, device companies, patients and investors, they really differ. We don't have a common language. So from an investor perspective, it's well known that life science investment is quite risky due to drug failure. And you hope as an investor, you're going to get high rewards when it works. The patient engagement community really needs to be able to explain why patient engagement is of such huge value. And the key to this is it's a de-risking tool. So if investors don't know about it, how are we going to tell them? That's part of what this tool is for. It can help investors get a competitive edge over every other investment company, but it also gives companies themselves a way to explain how they're de-risking their opportunity. We hope that eventually the investor community will become stewards and at least encourage, if not mandate, that their investment companies are actually looking at this. And if we can increase, it's tri-directional, but at this stage probably bi-directional communication and engagement between these parties, we can serve patient interests far better.
Thank you so much, Faye. Yeah, this is what I'm hearing, that the tool really is designed to help people in the patient engagement community connect well and directly with investors. And so, Nicole, how do you envision that the tool is helping patient organizations specifically when engaging with healthcare investors?
Thanks, Vincent. Yeah, and I completely agree with the points that Faye has raised as well. I think from our perspective, from a patient organization perspective, I think the tool could be really helpful in helping us bridge the knowledge gap between the patient community and healthcare investors. I feel like we've made considerable strides in engaging with industry, but working with healthcare investors remains a relatively new and unfamiliar domain for many patient organizations within the UK specifically. I think we've been very successful in working with industry on patient engagement, but the language and the approach, we can't use the same approach that we've worked with industry as we're working with the healthcare investment community, because the motivations, the terminology, it's all different. And I think this is where the tool can really be useful. And also, it could help us to better understand the different types of investors and their motivations as well, as part of the tool, which is really important for us because we always seek for co-investment sometimes with the projects that we're investing in the Parkinson's space. So it can help us make some informed decisions, and also can assist in communicating where patient engagement fits into the investment life cycle, mirroring what we've done in terms of the integration of patient engagement in the research life cycle, which we try and explain when we're working with industry. I think there's a sort of a bit of a mirror here in terms of this area as well.
Thank you, Nicole. I hear the differences between engaging with industry and with investors are important, and certainly the tool here is supposed to help pivot patient engagement with investors specifically. And so both you and Faye, you have brought up a few things that will be picked up or that are picked up in the tool and that we will discuss today. So let's have a look at how the tool is actually set up and what an example outcome of using it could look like. So the pivot tool guides you through 5 steps towards building an evidence-backed, narrative-driven approach to share an investor-tailored story of the value of patient engagement. It helps understand the motivations of investors, draft key messages and calls to action, back them up with evidence, and then put it all together into a persuasive narrative. We have also a high-level example of how this could look like after going through all the aspects of the tool. This could be a elevator pitch style compilation that provides the evidence to substantiate the claims. For example, how patient engagement can increase profitability by enabling better market adoption, for instance, or reducing clinical trial delays, speeding up regulatory approvals as well. The tool also helps make the case for trends in sustainability reporting and where to find those trends. And of course, also it helps relate the different data points to what matters most to the investor partners, and gives examples of how patient engagement can influence the investment life cycle and reduce uncertainty within it. So that's a high level example of what can come out of using the pivot tool. And Pommeline, I'd like to give you the floor next and hear from your perspective, what's the value for patient engagement champions to have a compiled narrative-based elevator pitch on patient engagement with which to approach investors. Pommeline?
Yes, thank you, Vincent.
Okay.
Is this better in terms of sound? Because I saw that my sound was not best.
I hear you well.
Yep, perfect. Yeah, thanks a lot. So for the short elevator pitch, so I think it's really valuable to have something ready as a conversation starter. I think especially when time is limited, for example, in first meetings, really to get your message across, but also to really get to know and to understand each other and each other's position. I think that's both important or equally important from a patient side as well as from an investor side, because I think that's really a two-way street. I think, at least from my experience, so my interactions with patients have been mostly initiated from the investor side so far. And I think that's mostly because of a lack maybe of proactive places or opportunities to meet each other. But I think as patients and investors will be interacting more and more with each other, it will be really valuable to have that at hand, really to have that first interaction being as fruitful as possible.
Thank you, Pommeline. And you bring up great challenges in terms of missing spaces where to connect. But what I'm hearing is that a first convincing compilation of insights into patient engagement can really help bridge the first conversation. And Nicole, you already mentioned that Parkinson's UK is in a unique position as a patient organization because you also have a venture arm. And I'm wondering there if you could provide or give an example of how this tool could be applied within that structure.
Thanks, Vincent. So at the moment, we are currently refining how we assess companies applying for our funding arm and how we manage the current portfolio of companies that we have from a patient engagement perspective. And so actually in this refining process, I've already started to utilize aspects of the pivot tool in helping me think about the key checkpoints in the investment life cycle, from all the way from sort of assessing prospective companies all the way through to managing the portfolio that we have. So it's been actually, although we've done patient engagement over the last 4 or 5 years as we've had this venture arm, I feel as though it's provided a bit more of a systematic approach to how we can integrate patient engagement in the processes that we currently have, because I don't think we had the right language or the understanding of how so the investment community works as a whole. So that's been really, really useful. And then I was just thinking in this morning in terms of going forward and the future application of the pivot tool. And I just thought that it can actually be used to help us secure co-investment as well, particularly when engaging with other venture capital firms, because we frame Parkinson's UK's contribution as a strategic value driver, and I feel this can kind of help us in that aspect as well. So lots to think about in this area for us.
So you would also consider using the pivot tool as an inspiration for your conversations as an investor with another investor.
Yeah, I think so, because I think again it's just that it helps with that conversation and actually motivating someone to take part, because we're obviously an impact. Our motivation for investment is directly for the patient benefit, but we realize that not all investors are in that space. So we have to decide on which other investors are with the similar mentality that we can partner with, and I think the tool can help us help us differentiate the different type of investors that are out there.
Yeah, actually, let's dive into that section. You're making my life easy, bringing up the next section of the tool, which really helps understand different types of investors, because not all are the same. It's in the patient engagement community as well. We are really strong about our segmentation and our identities, and so it is in other communities as well. And the pivot tool helps you understand how this works with types of investors. Those that may be receptive to the value of patient engagement, and as Nicole already indicated, generally those are the ones that are interested in long-term growth opportunities for their investments, and also look at societal outcomes beyond the financial return that an investment may yield. In other words, those are responsible and impact-focused investors, and they include different types like venture capital, private equity, and also some institutional investors, such as retirement funds, for instance. Another key aspect of those investor types is that they usually hold board seats in the companies they acquire, which gives them a voice and a certain influence with the executive leadership shaping the strategy of those companies. And when patient engagement is regarded within those investor types as a performance driver, then they may leverage patient engagement themselves, either apply it themselves within their internal processes or act as stewards for the practice of patient engagement in their portfolio companies. And on this particular topic, luckily we have an investor here. So Pommeline, I would like you to share a few thoughts on why responsible investors are a good target group, and perhaps also why Gilde Healthcare is particularly convinced of patient engagement as a performance driver.
Yes, thank you, Vincent. So I think I agree responsible investors are a good target group, but I really don't think they are the only ones. I think by being impact-driven, investors might be more open or more targeted in really that search for making an impact. But I think in the end, when interacting with patients, you do so really because they're an important part of the wider ecosystem, and to really understand their perspective. As an investor, for example, in my own experience, I would speak to or with patients really to understand their patient pathway, to understand their unmet needs, and to just really get their perspective. And I think that's a crucial part of making sure that as an investor, you're looking at something that can make a difference. And I think that's not limited to just being an impact investor, but it really becomes part of your investment thesis, I would say. So yeah, I think definitely responsible investors are a really good target group, but I think it's really applicable to any healthcare investor, I would say.
Thank you for that, Pommeline. And yeah, I'm curious to see how we can all move towards creating the spaces where the different communities can come together and connect. And yeah, actually, we are going to dive into the investment life cycle. And Pommeline, I'll give you the floor directly there as well, because the pivot tool not only gives information about different types of investors, but also the life cycle that investors go through and how patient engagement can support at different stages. So, for example, investors may perform patient engagement activities to ensure, as Pommeline already alluded to, that the initial scoping of investment opportunities actually shortlists only those that truly aim to address unmet needs of the patient communities targeted. At later stages in the investment life cycle, there may also be opportunities to facilitate patient engagement with the existing investments while managing the portfolio, so that the companies that are in the portfolio of the investment funds actually integrate patient engagement across their development pipeline and scale together with patient insights and patient needs specified. So, Pommeline, what's the added value here for the patient community from an investor's perspective? And please feel free to give some examples from Gilde Healthcare as well.
Yes, thank you. So I think you already mentioned a few. So I think it's important to split indeed between two phases. Basically, first phase when you're looking into or assessing a new potential investment, a new technology, a new drug, and then on the second part, if a company is already an investment or a portfolio company. I think during that first part, so really when assessing new companies, it's very case by case dependent. When you interact with a patient, I think generally speaking, it's just really important to do, as they are a crucial part of the ecosystem, and it's just important to get the perspective of a patient, both on their pathway, but also their burden of disease. Really, yeah, what is it that they are looking for? And I think in every single stakeholder from the ecosystem, that might be a different perspective. And as an investor, it's important to understand all of those. So that's really important. And then I think also as a company might develop further, or at one point, if it's a portfolio company, for example, when you're thinking of setting up clinical trials, it's important to interact with patients to understand whether a protocol design, for example, resonates with the patients, or whether the endpoints that you're measuring are really capturing what matters. And I think in the end, that only contributes to bringing the right products to market in that sense. So yeah, I think long story short, important both for assessing new opportunities as already existing companies. And I just think, generally speaking, patients can really add value in the entire cycle, starting from really product development until when a product is already on the market, because it should be probably a constant feedback loop, because patients are just a very important part of that ecosystem.
Yeah, I think with that last comment on the feedback loops, you're really speaking out of the heart of many patient engagement advocates, and we've noticed it in our conversations as well in terms of demonstrating the impact of patient engagement. The feedback loops are unfortunately still not mature enough, and it remains a challenge to be addressed together. But what I'm hearing from you, Pommeline, is that there are multifaceted opportunities for patient engagement to add value to the investment processes. And maybe before I go to Nicole to ask him about the examples that he's already mentioned in terms of how Parkinson's UK integrates patient engagement in their investment efforts, Faye, I'd like you maybe to comment a little bit from an industry perspective, especially the teams that directly engage with investors. What's your take on Pommeline's comment and on the life cycle approach here?
Well, I think going to Pommeline's comment, it's always astounded me that as an industry, we never actually consider the way we should the final consumer. We're taught from an early stage in industry, the people you need to interact with are your doctors. And that's because you need prescriptions for most things. But these days, patients have far more power than we estimate, because they can say, well, this made me feel really ill, or taking this is a real pain. These things matter, and patients will not put up with things that are really difficult for them. And we're seeing more and more of that as the industry develops. So patients are front and center, as they should be. Industry needs to get better at listening, but not just listening. Listening isn't enough. Doing something for its real customers. And I think this goes back through the cycle. As Pommeline said, the feedback loop. Why do we need this? An industry needs to recognise that if it's going to be successful and make impact with its products, it needs to conduct patient engagement, and not just as a tick box. It needs to be real. And that's where I hope we'll be before, I kick the bucket.
Thank you, Faye. And in fact, I believe, as was said before, and what we have observed as well, with Pommeline and Hilde Healthcare, we really have a partner as the patient engagement community. We have a partner that is already advanced, that really believes in the value that that patient engagement can provide, and actually applies it actively as well. And Faye, you're pointing out rightly so that there's many learnings still to have. And Nico, I know that you've made some learnings already, and you mentioned as well, it's different talking to investors than to industry about patient engagement. And so, yeah, I'm wondering, how does that look like in Parkinson's UK's efforts around investment?
Thanks, Vincent. I think if you look at the investment life cycle here, which is shown on the screen, I feel like at Parkinson's UK, we are hitting a number of these, although we're evolving our process to make it more thorough. And central to the work that we're doing in terms of patient engagement for our Parkinson's Research Ventures, which is the arm, what we call for our investment fund, is an involvement steering group. And this is something I would definitely advocate for other investors who may be on this call or others. This is a long-term strategic advisory group that was established at the same time as when the investment fund was established. And this comprises of people living with Parkinson's and care partners. And they provide essential advice on our priority areas, help us evaluate applications that are coming through the investment fund, and offer feedback on how we can communicate ongoing things about the projects. So, and we're continue evolving its collaboration with this group, but we are looking to make a number of changes to our approach. And these include getting formal lay assessments so that we can have more of a diverse opinion on the companies that are coming to us. We're also looking to put a patient representative on the board that makes the ultimate final decision on whether we take these companies forward, and also the post-investment discussion. So once we've invested in these companies, how do we have continual patient engagement with these companies? The reason why all these things have not been fully embedded in the initial phases of this project is because, unlike a normal traditional grants program, like we do have a separate grants program, there are issues around confidentiality, trust, and so forth that don't really exist with your traditional grants model, that do exist when you have a share in a company, or they are worried about particular information being spread across the public domain. So that's the reason why it's been a bit slower in this field than maybe in other areas. Hopefully that was helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nico, for providing that example and also explaining some of the challenges in making it happen. Of course, we've been talking about how patient engagement can add value to the investment process, to the investment life cycle, to which types of investors, and how to initiate a conversation so that investors listen. But what about the evidence? Like, what is it really that we need to show, and how can we communicate that to help investors see the value of patient engagement? And for that, one of the key aspects of the Pivot tool is this slide, which you're seeing on the screen now. Many of you may know this already. It compiles evidence of the financial and societal value of patient engagement. It is really crucial in the Pivot tool because it helps substantiate the key messages and calls to action with evidence, and it also helps to approximate matching the language that investors understand by default, which is the language of return on investment. And again, here I'd like to invite the speakers to to think about how can this help as well in the whole package to bridge communication gaps between the patient engagement community and the investment community. And Faye, I'd like to give you the floor first.
Sure, thank you. I think, we've mentioned time and time again this session, communication is the key. And there are big barriers to it. There are that many, I won't list them. But when you do get into the position where you can communicate, you've got to resonate with the investors. You've got to think like they do, what matters to them. It's got to be evidence-based value add. And you've got a beautiful slide here, which essentially can give you that. It's even better, although I know it's the holy grail, if you can use your own data to support this, and I know how hard that is. You have to, the big word is de-risk, show value. And to anyone out here listening, if you happen to be in a company looking for investment, if you can get the ear of your CEO or your CFO, batter them to death with this. Please do. Because the other thing is, as well as investors not really understanding what patient engagement is, you may well find neither do your C-suite. So you've got to train them and train them to talk to the investors. You are going to be doing a lot of explaining and demonstrating value. That would be my big advice. And at the end of the day, I'm hoping that the pivot tool here today makes that easier as a framework to use. The more engagement cascades we can get between all the three groups involved, the far better position we're going to be in.
Thank you, Faye. Very strong and hopeful aspirations that you're issuing there. Pommeline, how would you expect that what Faye is looking for takes actually place? How would you expect patients to bridge the communication gaps with investors?
Yeah, thanks, Vincent, and thanks, Faye. Yeah, so I think in terms of communication, there's still a real challenge ahead. I think, as we have mentioned before in this session, the patient and innovation, patient and investor interactions are quite early stage still, and I think it's with every interaction just really important to first really get to know each other and each other's role, because we just still do not always speak the same language, I think. And I think that's just really important to have a good conversation and to build that trust, to interact in the right way with each other. I think in the conversations that happen between the investors and the patients, it's just also really important to be mindful of that and to ask the questions when, for example, field-specific language is being used that we might not would understand at one point. So to really just clarify anything that's unclear. But I think in the end, the more we interact with each other, the easier it will get. And I think tools like this will really help indeed. Because of course, as investors, we like to see these slides. But no, I think it's just really important to indeed be aware of it, of the communication challenge, and to be as open as possible about it, to really, from both sides, try to speak the same language and yeah, to have it so as fruitful as possible.
Thanks, Pommeline. I like that, it's not, from your perspective, it's not just on one particular stakeholder or group to bridge, but it's up to everyone involved. We are very good in time. So Nico, maybe what have you noticed? What helped bridge the communication gaps in between your teams and the investment teams at Parkinson's UK?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. I think we can have, this is a great tool to provide patient organizations with a better understanding of the investment community and the motivations. But at the moment, mainly I don't know about our investment arm. They obviously have far more interactions. But if I was speaking for patient organization in general, I think there's very, very limited opportunities at the moment to bring these communities together. So even though we can have an amazing tool, when do we have the opportunity to actually utilize the content of the tool in live situations to motivate each other to work with one another? I think that's an area that needs to be improved upon from our perspective. And this is touching upon I think the final piece, but it's great to see, Haley and others from PFMD and other organizations going to these investment conferences, but at the moment they're so expensive and the entry point is so difficult from our perspective, from patients and patient organizations. That is a definite barrier that needs to be overcome if we want to push this field forward.
Thank you so much, Nico. And thanks, Faye and Pommeline, for your contribution so far as well. The Pivot tool we've heard and we have seen is designed to help bridge communication gaps, match the languages that each stakeholder can understand, help the patient engagement community understand the types of investors and their motivations, as well as how to match patient engagement with the investment lifecycle and practices and substantiate that with evidence. Of course, it's a beginning, and there's many challenges that we've heard about that still need to be addressed. And Nico pointed out a big one: where can the patient engagement and patient community particularly connect with in the investment community? And so I'd like to open up the Q&A for today. So everyone is welcome to share their thoughts and questions in the chat. We actually already have two. So I'm going to start reading out the first one. Is the investment community giving a return to the patient organizations which are part of their dialogue for providing funding for research? So I think, Pommeline, this one is best addressed by you.
Sorry, could you repeat the question once more?
As I understand it, it's the question is whether patient organizations and patient experts are remunerated for their part in the dialogue, and that informs the investment decision.
So whether there's a remuneration for the interactions. Yeah, I think that's something that's of course very important. I think yeah, as an investor, when we speak to experts, which can then also be a patient, I think it's appropriate to offer that. I think it's as said, still in the early stages, probably so probably not that standardized, but I think that's yeah, an appropriate thing to do in that sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Robert, please put it in the chat or raise your hand if you want to clarify the question. Faye, you want to answer to this as well?
Hang on. Yo, I'm not on mute. What a change. I was going to say, I've been asked by investment companies before, as a general patient advocate, could I comment on things? And I am paid, I wouldn't quite say it's fair market value. What I do find interesting, though, is that large pharma, when they invite someone like me to be part of a patient advisory council, and I've done this many times, they always will pay patient experts, patients, they don't have to be an expert, fair market value. So I think whichever way you cut it, it should be there, depends on the size of the company and what they're going to reimburse you. But increasingly, many patients are asked to stand up at conferences, and they're asked to do this free of charge. That is not right, and that does need to change.
Thank you, Faye. And Robert, you've really opened a kind of worms. Also, I see in the chat many comments, but please, go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, I was actually, it's interesting the way this has turned because it wasn't actually the intent of what I was asking, which is quite curious. My question was really more focused on, for example, with Parkinson's UK, if they are bringing a need to the investment community and saying this is something that our community needs to have resolved and we need investment in, is once that project, if it does come to fruition and you do get some therapy that is advantageous to the patient community, is there an investment return going back to, say, for example, St. Parkinson's UK, because they were part of the matrix that created this opportunity for that investment?
Yeah, that's a great question, Robert. And there is. So we do have a percentage stake in the companies that we have invested in. So if there is a product that comes on the market that's profitable, then there will be a certain percentage coming back into the charity. That's the USP of our sort of investment fund compared to the grants program, which is where we don't have return of investment. So yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you for clarifying, Robert and Nico, for an answer. Pommeline, did you want to comment on that as well? I saw you nodding. Don't want to force
no particular comments. I think it's very much depends indeed on also the type of involvement there. So yeah, I think it's covered by Nicole.
Okay. Great. It's very lively in the chat, so I'm gonna pick out another question. There is some doubts about how to set up the collaboration between patient organizations and investment companies, and I don't want to go into the details of what is needed for that necessarily. But one of the follow-up questions there was, what if the advice that the patients give or the patient organizations provide leads to a bad investment? What are the responsibilities that stay with those providing the advice? Faye or Pommeline, both of you.
I think Pommeline should go first because what I have is my opinion on that from what I know. Pommeline is better equipped, so Pommeline, to you.
No, happy to give a first answer here. So what if the advice leads to a bad investment? I think the decision making of making the investment is in the end still with the investor, and we will speak with patients to really understand their perspective and take that as a crucial piece of information that feeds into that decision. But in the end, when we speak to experts, we will probably not speak with just one expert. We will speak with multiple to really get a good understanding that we feel is representative of the field. So I think, of course, we expect that when interacting with patients, they will tell us really their perspective and how they see it. But I think it's quite common that that's actually different between one and someone else. And for us, it's just really important to understand the variances therein and to base a decision on those different perspectives. So I don't think that one specific opinion will guide that decision only.
I wanted to add, my response is almost identical to Pommeline's, and in the past when I've worked in investor relations or helping fund managers make decisions on investments, you aren't just looking, it's not just the patients you speak to, you're speaking to the scientists, you're speaking to people with commercial experience. What the patient perspective adds is a value that nobody else can give about how viable is the investment. This is assuming the big issue, which is, does the product work? That can essentially, given that 1 in 10 medications gets from inception to the patient, that risk is huge. patients are so integral to getting through the often 10 years of trial, sometimes as low as 6, faster, with better return on investment, so you're not wasting money. No, to the whole question, no single opinion is responsible for the investment manager's decision. Nobody giving their opinion is ever going to be sued unless the law gets turned upside down, which I don't think will happen, for giving an opinion.
Thank you, Faye. Nico, please.
I completely agree with the points that Pommeline and Faye have raised in terms of the way in which we make investment decisions. It's multi-stakeholder, multifactorial. There's scientific advisory boards. There's patient engagement. There's so many different arms to it that are contributing. But to be honest, I think I've seen it more the other way, that by not having the patient engagement, there has been poor investment decisions which have not gone the right way. So you would think that actually it's there's been situations where projects may have been prioritized which are not the priority of the patient community. There have been particular protocols which have gone through that have had issues with, where if there was patient engagement, then they would have been improved upon. So actually, I think the contrary is obviously as equal as the former in terms of the statement that was made in the question.
Yeah, absolutely, Nicola, I agree. And Faye, you've been speaking a lot about de-risking. In the Pivot tool, we have a lot of information around how patient engagement can reduce uncertainty for investors, which of course is a risk factor. And so we have a great question in the chat that is actually around those risks. And so, Faye, I'd like to pose that to you. Your experience or knowledge of pointing out the risks of not involving patients, which is of course what Nico alluded to, and whether that is the right framing for investors.
Well,
maybe Pommeline can also
this
contribute.
is a fascinating subject because we have so much qualitative data supporting this. It's real data. What we are missing, and this is being worked on by many people, myself included, is trying to create a model that is quantitative return on investment from patient engagement. Because ultimately, when you can actually do that, you can give it to an investor and go, here you go. Now, that's a lot of work. There are many things factoring into that. But it's common sense. You design a study that is impossible to access, doesn't actually involve the people you're trying to solve the problem for. Why would people turn up for it? They don't get paid to do this. I mean, that's common sense. So obviously targeting the right people, reducing the burden, that doesn't take a degree to work that out. And I was interested in, I believe it's Ingun's thing. Are there topics that as APOs you cannot talk to investors about? Technically, no. But there are a few watch outs. The first one of all is do not speak about personal patient experiences. They have to be anonymized. If you're happy to speak from your heart about it as a personal patient, that's okay. But various medical and every other known regulation, and there are many, would say no, keep it anonymous. You can always get the backup for it. But yeah, there are a number. I'd recommend anyone to look at healthcare regulations on data and privacy. That's what you can't talk about. I hope that helps
Thanks.
a bit.
Thank you, Faye. All right, we are approaching the end of today's session. So I'd like to close this panel conversation with a last question for each of you. And maybe that can be a call to action as well. What's the one thing, the one key message that that people should take from this session to strengthen the collaboration between patient and investment communities? I'm gonna go by Pommeline, Nico, and Faye.
Yes, thanks, Vincent. So I think for me, what becomes clear also from this session is that there is a clear value in interacting between investors and patients both ways. And for me, the next step and what we really need to work on now is those practicalities that were mentioned during the session. So really, when and where should you be interacting, and can you find each other, and when and how can you best be interacting and most efficiently be interacting with each other. And that's really where I still see the key challenge here.
Thank you, Pommeline. Nico?
Yeah, similar to Pommeline, I think for me, I think we need to bring or somehow bring these two communities together to raise awareness of patient engagement. We know that people living with chronic conditions hold deep understanding of the unmet need, the patient experience, which is crucial in the development of good medicines. So the fact that the investment community are investing in those companies, we need to bring them together, and we need to figure out ways and approaches to break down some of these barriers over time by advocating to whether it's conferences, the investment community, and so forth. We just need to keep pushing forward for that. Yeah.
Thank you, Nico. Faye, please go ahead.
I agree with everything Pommeline and Nicole have said. I have a slightly different view on it, though, which is I keep talking about three groups. The intertwining of them is crucial. As we all know, the barrier between where do you meet investors as a patient, it's there. We can't fix that quickly. But by chipping away at all three elements, that's another way of doing it. And I'm like, patients will more often, I suspect, be speaking to pharma and medical development companies. Use them as your channel to investors, because fundamentally, each three audience uses language differently. We need to keep it simple so that everyone can understand. That's a big ask. I get that. Offer yourselves as help. Think about what you can do for them that gets you to your end goal. That way, incrementally, we'll build. Well, that's what I would hope. I may be a bit of an optimist, but that would be my message. Get out there and try and engage. If you don't try, you'll fail.
Thank you, Faye. And the pivot tool is a first step at helping you do that. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you, Pommeline, Faye, and Nico, for your time today. For all the participants, we have a short poll coming up to help us gauge your satisfaction with the session, and hopefully also improve in the future. And in addition to that, in the chat, you will now be able to find the link to the beta version of the pivot tool online, where you can go in detail through all its sections and its various content pieces. We look forward to hearing from you on the utility of the tool, how you will plan and use it. And if you have any feedback, of course, you can always reach out to the PFMD team and enrich our thinking and the group's thinking on this tool. So special thanks also to the Investment Sustainability and Impact Task Force that has enabled the co-creation of this tool. And it's one of several coming up, so stay tuned. PFMD is working on addressing the challenges that remain and continuing to empower the patient engagement community to foster relationships between patient, industry, and investment communities. To close the call, there is a couple of upcoming PEOF sessions, so please feel free to sign up to them. The exciting PEOF Plus Africa is launching, has launched, and is now looking into strengthening patient engagement in Africa. Be part of that conversation, and later on May 7th, engage in enticing conversation on the patient experience in the real world setting. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.